Picture this. You're 10 years old, orphaned and struggling in the miasmic system that is the Japanese Federal Child Services. Eventually, you find yourself rehomed in a newly established orphanage down south in Okinawa called Morning Glory Orphanage. And your new guardian is a 6-foot-tall, 250-pound brick house of a man approaching his 40s, whose appearance just screams, "I'm involved in organized crime." But it's not long before you get to know Uncle Kiru, who's kind, caring, protective, and supportive of all the children in his care. He may be stoic and slightly intimidating, and the permanent frown in between his eyebrows is deeper than the Mariana Trench, but he truly makes for a great guardian. Yakuza 3 introduces good old Kiru Kazuma some years after the previous two games, happily running an orphanage after cutting all ties with the Tojo clan. Of course, the series being what it is, it doesn't take long for Kiru to be dragged right back into the drama that is the Japanese Yakuza underworld. But before that point, we see glimpses of how Kiru takes care of his kids. He cooks meals, keeps an eye on their schoolwork, and gets heavily involved with whatever worries might plague a grade schooler's mind, like being bullied, struggling with a crush, and also kid troubles that are sometimes swept under the rug, like racism and poverty. Today we're going to be recreating one of the meals we see Kiru preparing for the orphanage, while also getting deep into the minds of these gangsters through Yakuza's food symbolism. For this particular recipe, we're not dealing with a fantasy setting or a science fiction universe. Yakuza takes place in the real world of Japan during specific periods of time such as December 1988 or January 2018, and it all runs on realism, borrowing the occasional crazy side story of course. This recipe is especially banal because it's a curry dish. Modern Japanese home cooking has a special relationship with curry, the same as Americans with mac and cheese. Much of the time, you're not making it entirely from scratch. You're buying jarred or boxed ingredients. It's a meal popular not just for its convenience, but also because it's well-liked amongst kids. Japanese curry is not Indian curry, or Thai curry, or Jamaican curry, and so on. Lots of countries have their own regional traditions when it comes to whatever they call curry. Japan's curry history traces to the Meiji era, aka the Victorian period, when British forces brought lots of new foods to feudal Japan. Famous Japanese yoshoku favorites such as breaded pork chops, potato croquettes, and omelette rice all sprung from this influence. Curry came to Japan from the British because Britain gained a love for curry through colonizing India. So Japan's curry culture is built not off of Indian curry, but through British curry, which in turn is based off of Indian curry. You get it. As far as Japanese curry cuisine goes, it makes for a perfect family meal. You can make a big pot of it using convenient ingredients, and the taste appeals to many. Japanese curry tends to run the mild, less spiced up route, thickened with flour and fats and stewed with water. With one single block of instant curry roux, you can make an entree for 4, leaving the curry to casually stew while you start up the rice cooker. Our goal today is to recreate what kind of curry Kiru would make. Technically, you can throw anything into a Japanese curry base, but there are some typical preferred ingredients. Onions, carrots, potatoes, sometimes peas, cubes of meat. The only ingredient we see Kiru preparing is the onions. He cuts them like he's defusing a bomb, and when one of the kids runs into the kitchen asking when dinner is, he tells them to leave. Nothing says, "I'm a home cook," like get the fuck out of my kitchen when I'm cooking. The ingredients in this recipe all kind of fall down to how good a cook Kiru is. So let's think about this. He grew up in an orphanage back in the 70s and 80s and probably relied on convenience stores and restaurants from then onwards. There wasn't really a point in his life prior to Morning Glory Orphanage that would prompt him to refine his home cooking skills. Plus, something about his seinen protagonist attitude makes me think he's the type of manly man dude guy who'd eat anything, quote unquote. So he might be dealing with Uncle Kiru making mediocre dad meals. On the flip side, Kiru is a very dedicated man. When given just a slight push, he's willing to learn new things that are completely unfamiliar to him, such as how to use modern laptops and internet, or be a shirtless model for performance photography. It's not hard to see Kiru reading cooking magazines in preparation for being a good uncle to his kids. Maybe in the beginning, 1 or 2 meals of his bland cooking spurred him to give the children better food. The very first meal we see him make in game is what looks like steamed fish. It's probably a bluefin tuna, which are plentiful around Okinawa. When he serves it to the kids, it's whole on the plate with some juices underneath, and garnished with green onion and cilantro. Steaming an entire fish is typical in Asian cooking. You put the entire thing into a bamboo steamer atop boiling water, and what's likely to be a wok, especially if it's a bigger fish. Easy to cook and easy to spice and sauce. It looks legitimately good. Not only are there multiple garnishes, but it's plated with 2 extra leaves on the side to make it especially pretty. This was prepared not just with efficiency, but also with an eye for beauty and delicious cuisine. If Kiryu did indeed catch it right out of the ocean, he'd also have to dress the fish by descaling, gutting, and cleaning it, which is harder than it sounds. If we're looking at a properly prepared 2-foot bluefin tuna, steamed and seasoned, then we can conclude that Kiryu is at least capable of cooking with a capital C. In every cooking scene, Kiryu is always accompanied by Haruka. She's either helping set the table or gathering the rest of the kids. It's possible that she's having a hand in the actual cooking too. In the beginning of Yakuza 2, Haruka outright states that she's been cooking for the both of them, and that her cooking has gotten better. Haruka's 12 in Yakuza 3, and raise your hand if you were cooking for your family at that age, cause I certainly wasn't. She's taken up a big sister role in the orphanage, being the eldest kid there, and shoulders a lot of responsibility for the other kids without prompting. On the flip side, what little we see in the actual curry cooking scene doesn't quite scream skilled cook to me. He's cutting the white onions correctly using the kitten paw technique to slice the blade lengthwise along the ridges, but then he throws them raw into the stock pot without sweating or caramelizing them. It's possible that he's using the same pot to cook everything in succession, but if he's not, then he's just tossing raw onions into a stewing curry and calling it a day. The actual in-game model of the finished curry is kinda nondescript, no thanks to Yakuza 3's outdated engine, but we can make out red bits, brown lumps, and small green dots. It's also plated with a serving of bright red sticks on the side. To me, it's clearly meant to represent peas, meat, what's possibly tomatoes or yams. The red garnish, I'm not sure. It could be a traditional Japanese side dish like burdock, daikon, or ginger that's been dyed red using UMEZU vinegar, which is the leftover brine from making umeboshi.
俺はお前のお父さんにはなれない。でもお前がこの朝顔に来た時から家族だと思っている。
The actual curry meal we're recreating is from a particularly heartwarming scene. Haruka helps plate the dinner table with a generous serving of curry for everyone, but one child is missing, so Kiryu hunts down a depressed Izumi with comforting words about her parentless status. They walk back hand in hand and find that none of the kids have started eating yet. They were patiently waiting for the both of them all this time despite their hungry bellies. English-speaking audiences might not be familiar with Japan's unique stigma surrounding orphans. In Japanese culture, adopted people struggle with the idea of being not actually part of the family. Even on a government level, orphans are given less options when it comes to lineage, which affects their ownership rights. The stigma is so tied within the system, no matter how supportive the public might be of orphans, their lives are oppressed nonetheless. So there's a reason why Yakuza 3 is so themed around orphans. Kiryu himself is an orphan. The main villain is also an orphan. A huge chunk of the game surrounds Morning Glory Orphanage. The whole orphan theme stretches across the entire franchise for reasons everyone, not just the Japanese audience, can understand. Who's more likely to get sucked into a crime culture with a heavy emphasis on found family? Who gets left behind when crime ends up killing? How many of the major characters are orphans? And how many of the villains have blood families that they don't appreciate? Yoshitaka Mine, the main villain of Yakuza 3, is a fitting end boss for such an orphan-heavy game. He was a poor orphan child, the same as Kiryu and the Morning Glory kids. He rose to the top of the corporate chain even before getting involved with the Tojo clan. It's a very similar story that all orphan Yakuza share, whether their rise to success is through crime or business or both.
If you're looking for Daigo, Mine's taken him up to the roof.
なんだと?
Throughout the game, the player is led to believe that Mine wants to off Daigo to take his place as chairman, but when Kiryu faces him, Mine drops the bomb that he is, in fact, completely infatuated with Daigo because he treated him like an equal, rather than a shitty orphan or a rich mooch. Why does he want to kill a comatose Daigo? Because he can't bear to see his love so weak and on the brink of death. That's not his Daigo.
俺は虚しかった。目標になる人間を失った以上、次の生きがいが俺は欲しかった。
Some balk at the inclusions of LGBT content spread across the Yakuza series, but the majority of the gay, queer, trans characters, they prompt the overarching moral of be true to yourself even if you're marginalized. Kiryu and his orphans struggle with fitting into larger society, and they in turn relate to fellow oppressed people. Plus, if you're someone in tune with the criminal underground, the more likely you'll find people who fall under the cracks. There's that mid-game scene where Mine goes to bulldoze Morning Glory Orphanage for insert plot reasons here, but it's obvious that Mine is also doing it because he resents these kids for having something he didn't. Kiryu takes good care of his children, whereas Mine suffered through a childhood that hardened him. So when we see Kiryu cook for his kids, we're also seeing a life that would have saved the villain. We're seeing the victims of a country's government. We're seeing mirrors of previous beloved characters like Nishiki and Yumi, as well as current protagonists like Kiryu and Ichiban. That curry scene of a huge dinner table with all those kids, they not only break bread as a family, but they also make it a point to wait until everyone's there before eating. Think about curry. Like soups, it's cooked in a big pot before being served in individual servings. It's a communal food. And in Japan, it's something of a peasant dish because you're using cheap ingredients, stretching out the meat using flour and water. To make our recreation, we'll first nail down the exact ingredients Kiryu would have used, down to the brand. So head to the supermarket to pick up a box of S&B Golden Curry Sauce Mix. There is powder forms and mix and block forms, and either will do. They come in 3 levels of spiciness, mild, medium, and hot. And since Q is making it for the children, he'd likely choose the mild version. We're using this brand in particular because they're, by and large, the top distributor of cheap curry roux in Japan. When Kiryu goes grocery shopping in downtown Ryukyu, which is a small town, that is most definitely what he'd find stocked. Now on to the other ingredients. Let's aim for a very typical Japanese home curry dish, and we're gonna buy bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs, yellow potatoes, orange carrots, white onions, and frozen peas. You can vaguely make out some beige light brown lumps in the cutscene, which to me looks very much like curry-fied diced chicken and not the dark brown of beef. Pork is another option, but it's a much less commonly used ingredient in Japanese curry. Morning Glory would have received a regular government pension that'd be their sole income. And it's true that 2008 Ryukyu would certainly up the market price of meat by virtue of it being located on a Japanese island. But chicken and other bird meats you can find in Asia's traditional markets like duck, turkey, pigeon sometimes, wouldn't be as pricey as beef or pork, which are livestock animals that require a lot of land, which is something Japan lacks. If Kiryu's orphanage funds were really low, he'd stick to the local seafood to feed the kids, and not shrimp or albacore, but cheap meats like loaches, small crabs, sardines, and sari. He'd go late in the day when the fishmongers are wanting to get rid of the day's catch, and maybe even dig in the free buckets for barnacle fish and random tiny squids. None of those are typical Japanese curry ingredients, and I very much doubt the in-game curry scene features any of them. Feeding 9 kids, plus yourself and a dog, is expensive. That's not even getting into their clothes, medical needs, school supplies, toys, tickets to the movies, and the utility bills. But they never seem to want for anything, which tells me that either Kiryu or Hawako is a beast at budgeting, or the Japanese government isn't stingy when it comes to monetary aid. You can think of it as a parallel to main villain Mine's super affluent but sad life as someone unloved, but not wanting for money, and by extent, food. So without further ado, let's make Uncle Kiryu's Morning Glory curry. The ingredients you'll need for the curry are 1 white onion, 1 medium carrot, 2 to 3 bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs, 3 small yellow potatoes, 1/4 cup of frozen peas, 2 to 3 blocks of curry roux, and 1.5 to 2 cups of water. For the UMEZU DAIKON side dish, you'll need 1 cup of daikon radish cut into matchsticks, 2 tablespoons of plum vinegar, 1 tablespoon kosher salt, 1/4 cup of sugar, and a sealable container. We're following what little we can see of Kiryu's cooking expertise and making a batch that served 2 to 3 people. Not 10, I doubt any of you are cooking for that many and we don't want to waste food. But before the curry, we need to figure out the red garnish on the side. You're either buying a pickled red side dish from a Japanese ethnic store, or you're making some yourself using plum vinegar. The in-game model features them as thick, almost cube-like slices, which to me rules them out as ginger, which is almost always served as thin peels. And if they're pickled, then they're most likely daikon, which is a very popular Japanese side dish that's often made at home, but can commonly be bought jarred or bagged. Maybe you can find some store-bought daikon that's been pickled with specifically plum vinegar, but if you can't, then you can make some ahead of time. Find plum vinegar in ethnic grocery stores. If you can't, then you can fake it for the purposes of this recipe with some extra ingredients. Slice up peeled, raw daikon into sticks that are 2 inches long and around the width of a pencil, totaling perhaps a cup of radish. In the sealable container, toss in vinegar, kosher salt, and sugar to make into a liquid mixture. Put the sliced daikon in, cover, and refrigerate for at least a day. If you couldn't find plum vinegar, use rice vinegar and toss in deep red fruits like cherries, raspberries, or maybe just red food coloring if you're really lacking in options. After 24 hours, the daikon should be crisp and ruby red all the way through. Now for the curry. Get out a big old stock pot, the typical anime curry cooking scene sort of pot, and coat it with vegetable oil on low-medium heat. We're using this pot to cook everything sequentially, starting with what takes the longest to cook and ending with the shortest. White onions are first. Slice them the way Kiru does. Peel the skin off of one entire onion, then you're slicing it in half parallel to the natural ridges. Continue to slice along those ridges to make U-shaped pieces, and then you're throwing it all into the hot oil to sizzle. Next is carrot. Peel off the thick outer skin, then chop it diagonally into 1/2 inch thick slices. It gets tossed into the pot right after the onions. Stir, saute, and then cover the pot so that the two ingredients can cook and soften for about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, you can peel and dice the yellow potatoes into hefty cubes and debone the chicken thighs. After the 10-minute mark, the onion should be pretty translucent and the carrot should be softer. Throw in the meat and you're browning the chicken on all sides for a couple minutes. The aim isn't to cook them all the way through. Now comes the actual curry roux. Raise the heat to medium-high, then follow the instructions on the box. Powder packets and curry blocks require different amounts of water. Either way, you add the required water first, wait until it boils, and then stir in the roux. For 2 to 3 people, add at least 2 cups and start with 1.5 cups of water first. After you add the roux, throw in the peeled and diced potatoes. Cover, lower the heat once more to low-medium, and then you're allowing the entire thing to simmer for at least 15 minutes. Finally, throw in the frozen peas, and then allow it to further simmer for 5 more minutes. In between cooking the curry, you can make the rice. They're almost certainly eating typical Japanese white rice, short grain on the moist side. If you're not sure what to buy, go to an Asian ethnic grocery and look for Nishiki or Kohuko short grain brands. Measure out 2 cups, rinse thoroughly with water to wash off the cloudy starch. The more of that cloudy flour remains in the rice, the mushier it'll be when it's cooked, and you don't want that. Drain and put it into your rice cooker or saucepan with a bit more water than other rice varieties might require. Essentially a 1 to 1.25 ratio of rice to water, so in this case you're adding 2.5 cups of water. If you're making rice on the stovetop, put the raw rice and water into a pot and cover. Bring it to a boil on medium heat, then turn it to low when it does. Let it continue to cook covered for 10 to 12 minutes. After that, remove from heat entirely and let it stand covered for 10 minutes more to steam through. When it's done, there should be no water left, and all the rice should be soft all the way through and sticking together in globs. Now we can plate our curry. One half will be the rice, the other a hefty serving of curry. Don't skimp, cover the entire plate sans rim with food. On the side, pick out some of the pickled daikon and place it next to the rice. Serve with a glass of water and a Western spoon, both items rarely used by the Japanese unless it's curry time. Enjoy. To me, it tastes exactly just like the S&B brand curry I ate once or twice as a child, mellow and sweet. To people not used to Japanese curry, it's probably gonna taste pretty different from other varieties you've had. You may find it delicious, or weird, or bland. To my mom, who grew up on this stuff, she considered it a big throwback to the comfort meals of her day, which was a ringing endorsement on the authenticity of this recipe.
自分の道がこの先どうなってるか分かってるやつなんてこの世に一人もいねえ。俺らにできるのは立ち止まって泣くか一歩でも前に進むかの2つだけだ。
Thank you for joining this edition of Gamer Cooking Reciplore, and stay tuned for future videos.